Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Nick and I discuss hanging out at the NAEP conference. We talk to Ricardo Calvo about ESG, international careers, and general life advice. And finally, female dragonflies will fake their own deaths to avoid mating with undesirable males.
That sounds about right.
We'll launch onto that spirit animal every once in a while.
It's a good tactic, I think.
Gotta do what you gotta do, you know?
Right, exactly.
Hit that music.
Staff from Michael Baker International and Penrose Environmental Consulting will conduct a 4-day course sponsored by the North Carolina Association of Environmental Professionals on Aquatic Insect Ecology for environmental professionals from June 14th through the 17th, 2022 at Laurel Community Center in Sheldon, Laurel, North Carolina. Check out www.naep.org for details. We appreciate all of our sponsors, and they will keep this show going. If you'd like to sponsor the show, please head on over to environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out our sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment. You know, everybody's different, and that's another thing I learned a long time ago. Is like you can't just even somebody who's really charming and really fun and there's outgoing personality, but they might be the wrong person for the client that you want to bring in because that client may not like people who are like that.
It may not like nice people.
But it happens. You're laughing, but it's absolutely true. There was even I remember working at one of my previous companies, and yeah, there was a guy who was fantastic at marketing, but there was one client he knew. He's like, I can't be the guy that does this. They will not like me. They do not like me. Mm-hmm. And I know that. So someone else has to market this client. And it's like a crazy moment of self-awareness because in my mind, this guy's bringing in millions and millions of dollars, millions of dollars. And this should just be a walk in the park for him. But he actually took the time to say, nah, it's not going to be me. It needs to be somebody else. I was like, okay, all right. Life lesson, write that down.
Well, and that is actually a key to making all that money is turning down the things that aren't the good opportunities.
Mm-hmm. They're just not the right ones for him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Yep. I turned down a job a couple weeks ago. I was like, this isn't right for me. So, nope. And have to do that more often.
Yeah, it's hard to say no. It's okay to say no. You should say no sometimes. But I always respect.
I don't like it when you say no either, but...
Oh, God, no. Of course not. I hate it. I mean, we were looking for an acoustics firm for a project or proposal. And I have a great acoustics guy. Love him. He cracks me up. Hilarious. Very good at his job. But I asked him, I was like, hey, are you free? Can you help us out here? And I was like, he's never said no to me ever. So I was like, yeah, it's no problem. He's like, I would love to, but I honestly can't. And I'm like, dang it, But because he was a good guy, he's like, here's someone else that I know and I respect that I think would be a great fit for you. And that didn't work either because they were also busy, but I appreciate that he did it,
What you're saying is that's a good job to get into right now?
Well, it's a niche field, right? So everything that's niche is super important to lots of different people. So if you are able to do noise modeling or air quality, those two things are niche. There's just not that many people that can do them. Not that many people, even fewer that can do it well. And it's something that everybody needs. The challenge is that not one firm is going to be able to probably support you to do the kind of work that you want unless they're large. That's really literally it for niches. That's why partnering with large and small businesses, shout out to my talk at NAEP, is a really good idea because small businesses cannot afford or just can't keep someone on staff billable enough for those markets, but they are super important.
Yeah. So I didn't get to see your presentation. What was that about?
It was about the value of large and small businesses in relation to NEPA, why it matters. Sometimes we have to do it. There's requirements that make it, that say you have to have a small business component to your large business project. There are also opportunities that are specifically for small businesses. But, even those opportunities can be millions of dollars. They can be humongous projects. So having a partner is really important. Having a good partner is even better. And so honestly, that's basically what we did was walk through, how to have a good relationship. It is almost we joked about it a little bit, almost like dating. It really is like that, And,
who is we?
So I did the presentation with Chris Holdridge from HDR. And so Dawson and HDR have a really good working relationship. that's been going on for years. And yeah, we've had a lot of good work come through that. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to have him up there with me talking through it.
So I missed a lot of the presentations at the conference. What else were some highlights? Because you were there the whole time.
Yeah, I saw them all. Man, that's a good question.
You were only involved a little bit.
It was a lot of work. And a lot of people came up and thanked me for the conference, but I want to use the platform to say that there was a lot of different people that helped with that. And yes, I did have a hand in it, but yeah, there's so many people that in Florida, the Florida group, Tim Perry as well, who was basically leading the effort. Great people, great crew helping us out. So I did want to shout out for them. But yeah, the conference was really great. There were a lot of really fun presentations. I think Sonny's on wetland data predictive modeling was really, really cool. One of the things we do in the field, and Laura, you know this, it's you want to be able to predict where wetlands are and then field verify site wetlands. And they have a tool to do that even better, basically as well as you can without having to go in the field. And it was really neat to see how they did it and why. But it's absolutely one worth checking out. It was really neat. So Eric Nygaard that was on with us, he had a great tour of Port Everglades. I mean, people ranting and raving about how good it was. So I want to give a good shout out to Eric, and he helped organize all that and pull that all together. Did a great job with that. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we obviously can't get to everything that was really good, but having Brenda Mallory there, her speech, it was really, really, really good. And it actually tied really well to Sonny's keynote speech as well. And actually, all three keynotes were really, really good. We had Drew Bartlett from the South Florida Water Management District, which is SwiftMud, I found out from Laura. That's a thing. About basically restoring natural flow to the Everglades. That was really neat too. I mean, it was funny because the reason that flow was from the Everglades was messed up was because of canals. They basically built canals like, oh, we need water. Let's just take it from here. And then they realized that that makes everything algal bloom all over the place. And that causes all kinds of environmental disasters. But they're changing it with more canals, which is kind of funny. But but it actually, the way he presented it, the way it went, it was a very good talk.
But this time there's science involved.
Yes. Yeah, kind of.
The last time it was kind of.
Yeah, just do this. Yeah. Because we built a lot of stuff in the 40s. It was the 40s, like we built so many of these things in previous installations, military installations, same problem. And they're just like, let's just put it here. Why not? Like, because it's a wetland and it's literally under the floodplain. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I can't wait for 100 years from now for people to look back and go, look at what those idiots did. I know. I mean, but yeah, that's what we're doing now, Like people built the stuff they built in the 30s and 40s. They're like, what if we just make everything a straight line instead of all this bending in the river? And they don't have any contact. Down.
Yeah. Why would we want that? It's like, oh, it floods. Oh God. How do we undo this? We can't? Okay, great. Yeah. So it's just like, one of those long-term things. But there's a lot of really great NEPA talks as well. NEPA case law update at the end of the conference it's always the best update of the year. It's really, really informative. So Pam Hudson, Fred Wagner, Michael Smith all do a fantastic job with that. And it is absolutely a really important one. It's actually kind of a funny one this year where it was basically the 2020 rules for NEPA were like, they're not in the legal system yet. So we just don't even know if agencies are even using those rules, because they're just not showing up in the legal framework yet. So it's going to be a really interesting year. And I believe they're actually going to do an advanced workshop with that for the NEPA case law as well, sometime in the future. But that one's always fun.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We'll keep you posted.
So it was, all in all, it was a really great conference. Like I say, it's unfair to say that there's just so many good topics there. And you can go look at them all on NAEP.org, and they are still there. So really, really neat stuff. If you're a member, you can check it out.
If you're not a member, you could become a member, and then you could check it out.
There we go. That's why she's here, folks.
Actually, I'm here to remind us that it's time to get back to our interview.
All right, sounds good.
Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Ricardo Calvo, partner at ERM, Environmental Resource Management, on the show. Ricardo participated in the career development workshop at the last in-person NAEP conference in Baltimore, and he had so much great advice to share then. I'm really looking forward to today's interview with you. So welcome, Ricardo.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. So we've been really excited to have you here with us today. And it was a real challenge to come up with their questions for you that we could only ask in our little bit of time because you have so much experience and so much interesting experience. And so I think we just want to start with maybe your early years and find out, I'm interested to know if you were always a nature lover and how did you embark in your career early on?
I am from Venezuela originally, and I got my degree in biology at the Universidad Simón Bolívar. And I was lucky enough to be able to come to the US and do my doctorate in biology at the University of Miami. I always thought that I was going to be a scientist. So when I was about to graduate, I sent all kinds of applications for academic jobs, and I realized that it's really hard to get into the academic world. So I started sending applications for consulting firms. And I had done a little bit of consulting. So I started working with a small 2-person company in Miami, doing wetland delineations and wildlife inventories and whatever else they asked me to do. Mm-hmm. And from there, I kind of began to show, I guess, some aptitude to do project management and deal with people. So then I went to another company and spent 10 years with them, kind of progressing into project management and then group management, doing a lot of international work. And then I went to another firm for another 10 years. And it was very different because I was doing business development and marketing around not only biology, but other disciplines. And then now I have joined ERM as a partner for the last 8 years. And I'm back to international work, doing all kinds of different work. So perhaps the one comment I'll make about the career is that wherever you plan early on, you gotta keep an open mind because your career may go somewhere else.
Right. It's definitely a recurring theme on the show. So that just sparked so many things. So it's obvious for you listening why it was so hard to pick our questions, because that's so much great stuff. I'd like to know a little bit more because I get this question a lot about, I know it's been a while now, but making the switch from Venezuela to the US. Would you have any advice, or what was the key to your success in making that happen? Because I know things are a little bit different now, but it might be helpful for someone to hear maybe a few little tidbits on like how they could make that transition, because we do have international listeners too.
Yeah, I would say that the main thing that comes to mind is you never know when the opportunity is going to knock, right? And when it does, I would say be bold and take it. There is an expression I use a lot with my team and the people that I have mentored in my career, which is, knocking on the door doesn't mean that you're going to walk in. But if you do not knock on the door and the door never opens, then, you don't know what was on the other side, right? So my career is a little odd in that sense, in that, for example, when I got the opportunity to go to the University of Miami for my PhD, it was because I met a professor in Panama and they had an open position and he had seen my research and he said, hey, this is really good. I have an open position that I cannot fill anymore because I don't have time. You're good enough. If you want to apply, do it. And it would, there's only like 1 week for the deadline. So that threw me out for a loop, and I ran around, I got my application in, so I got in, right? And then later on, when I was in the PhD program, I had an idea for my thesis and that it wasn't working out. And then I was given a homework to do, and I did the homework, kind of came up with an idea. My professor said, hey, this is really good. You could probably develop this into your dissertation. And I did. But I didn't know, right? So I think that that's very important, that not only moving from one country to another, but progressing in your career, that when you see the opportunity, take it. The worst that can happen is that it doesn't work out. But if it does, it can just change your entire outlook and your entire progression in your career.
That's awesome. I love that. Knocking on the door, you don't have to walk through it. Mm-hmm. And so are you doing much field work now? Have you advanced out of that kind of work? Are you doing more office stuff?
I did a lot of field work in my early years. I've been doing this now for 32 years. So let's not start calculating my age, please. But certainly I don't do it anymore for several reasons, mainly because now I do program management and other kind of management things. And really in this business, because my rate is too high. So I'm not going to be out there, doing the field work. However, even to this day, I have the opportunity to travel to exciting locations with natural sensitivities that allow me to stay in touch with the reality of, in this case, biodiversity issues and social issues in remote areas, be it in Mexico or in other countries in Central America or Peru or Colombia. So while I do not quite do like the wetland studies and the wildlife inventories, I still have the opportunity to visit sensitive areas and try and make a difference in the projects we do.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to ask you one more question before I pass it over to Nick. He's like, when do I get to talk? I'm still curious. So I want to know, when you grew up in Venezuela, what was it that brought you into your love of nature? Any particular thing, or it's just part of how you grew up?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do a plug for Venezuela. Venezuela is a small country in the northern end of North America or South America, with long coast along the Caribbean Sea. And it has everything. It has everything from deserts to the high Andean mountains with permanent snow, an ecosystem that we call tropical alpine. Mm-hmm. We have Amazonian jungles, we have the tepuis, we have the Venezuelan flatlands. There is so much, right? So I was able to, when I started going into the biology degree in school, I traveled quite a bit. I got very interested in the high Andean mountains. So I did my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, studying these plants that are endemic to the high mountains of Venezuela. And I also got, at the same time, interested in orchids. Oh, nice. So I was, we would go out, on any given weekend and collect orchids. And I had a collection of about, 800 plants at home.
Oh my gosh.
And it was beautiful. I love that. So, and orchids have a very interesting pollination biology, reproductive biology. So that was all fascinating to me. And then again, as I mentioned before, I had this lucky moment that connected me to the University of Miami. So when I got there, I enrolled in the tropical biology doctorate program and wanted to continue to work in the high mountains. That didn't work out. So then I ended up doing my dissertation on orchid evolution. So very different. It was a big change from the high mountains to orchids.
Well,
wow, so cool.
I don't think there's a single hill in Florida, let alone mountains.
That's right. and to this day, I still miss the Venezuelan mountains.
Oh, I bet.
Of course. Yeah. So it's a really nice segue to our next series of conversations here. So how has being bilingual influenced your career?
I would say being bilingual doubled my career. Let's put it that way, right? Because I can operate equally as effectively doing work in the United States. And for many years, in those 10 years in the middle, all my work was in Florida. So I was operating purely in English. But when I joined ERM, going back into international work into Latin America was very easy. And basically, I have been able to have almost 2 careers because I have the bilingual capability. So it doubles your opportunities. Yeah. Doubles the pleasure, as they say.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's interesting. So you talk about all the international work that you do, and we haven't had a chance to really talk about international environmental documents. And so you've worked on environmental impact assessments throughout Latin America. So what are those, and how similar and different are those to the documents we see in the States?
Very interesting. Different countries from Mexico to Argentina and in the Caribbean have very different levels of regulatory structures, right? And requirements. Some are quite demanding and sophisticated. Others are more still evolving. A lot of the work that I have done through my career in Latin America has been around international financing of development projects in the different sectors of infrastructure. So when either a country, a government, or a private company wants to do a development project, be it roadways or power plant or a hydropower project, if they're getting this financial support from international institutions, then there is a whole other set of international requirements that the financial institutions apply to make sure that they put money into projects that will be well managed. And that creates a whole world of what's different between the country regulations and the international standards. And we operate, and I have operated in my career a lot within that interface, kind of making that connection and helping projects come up to meet international standards to be able to qualify for financing. And it's huge because we're talking about projects, in the 800 million, 1 billion. So it's big, what we do in helping reduce the environmental and social risks of these development projects, both for the project, for the country, and for the financial institution that is footing the bill, is very interesting and exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people understand international banking and how that influences these projects. So can you dive in a little deeper on why do those banks have such a large role in this type of work?
Speaking more for Latin America, which is what I know best, getting financial support from, say, a multilateral institution. And by that, I mean institutions that are funded by governments from around the world. And you have, for example, the World Bank.
Right.
And the private side of the World Bank, which is the International Finance Corporation. Specific to Latin America, you have the Inter-American Development Bank, which funds governments and government projects. And then you have the private side of IDB, which is the IDB Invest. So there are two sides. There is the public sector and the private sector. And for a government, say a government in Central America, they want to have a development program around improving their roadway infrastructure. Sometimes their local national budget cannot handle that, cannot handle the big investment in a short time. So they apply for funding from the IDB, and then IDB provides good conditions, interest rates, payment terms that are favorable for the country. And then they say, but if we're going to give you money for this, you have to make sure that your projects align with our requirements. And their requirements can be more strict around things like land acquisition. In Latin America, sometimes if the project has to relocate people involuntarily, basically the local law says, we'll pay you X and get out.
Right.
Under international standards, you have to do more than that. You have to be able to restore the livelihood of those families. You have to ensure and track the fate and the success of the relocation and things like that. So that again is what makes all this work so interesting. And it provides the opportunity for countries in the region to do more and faster than they could do under their own national budgets and their own regulations using these international financing options.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And so you mentioned, that you have done environmental and social risk management for these institutions. So what are you providing them when you go through these types of risks? Is this related to these challenges between the two groups that are working together?
I'm going to use perhaps the example of the most widely used framework of international standards, which is the IFC, International Finance Corporation, Environmental and Social Performance Standards. It's a set of 8 standards. Number 1 is a broader umbrella standard that establishes the requirement that projects have an environmental and social management system, that they have a system to identify impacts, and a system to ensure stakeholder participation. And then standards through to 8 are specific. 2 is about labor, 3 about environmental topics, 4 about health and safety of the communities, 5 about land acquisition, 6 about biodiversity, 7 about indigenous peoples, and 8 cultural resources. So any project would have to make sure that they cover all these topics, and that at the end of the day, They have a system to ensure that they're covering all the topics. And then for each particular performance standard, that they're taking care of labor issues like non-discrimination, ensuring gender equality in job opportunities. If we're talking about indigenous peoples, then there has to be a process of free, prior, and informed consent from the indigenous communities to align and accept that the project will occur in their lands, for example. So I could go on each one of these performance standards for hours.
I'm sure.
And many times we do, because one of the things I do a lot is do capacity building and training to both companies and governments around all of these standards.
Oh, yeah.
We can do another podcast on that.
But it does sound like a pretty incredible host of logistics that you have to understand just to even start working on these projects. So how do companies that say like, oh, I want to work internationally? And it's like, well, that's great, but you need to have all of these other things lined up. How does a company start doing international work?
You mean companies that are applying for financing or consulting companies that want to get into this business?
Want to get into it, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I would say that there are two sides to it. You can work on the side of the lenders, or you can work on the side of the project proponent, be it government or private. On the lender side, the lenders have a specific set of steps that they take to make decisions on whether they're going to finance the project. And there's a whole banking sequence of events from origination to due diligence to the contractual side of the loan document to the monitoring. That looks at marketing issues, financial issues, can the client pay back, all of that, right? And then there is also the environmental and social. So typically when we work for the financial institution, we get involved early on in a key step, which is the environmental and social due diligence. We evaluate the project. We look at all the documentation that they have in terms of their environmental impact studies, whether they have the capacity, mainly the staff and the budget to do things, whether they have addressed the issues along all of these topics that I mentioned before. And then we write a report. We go to the site, we interview stakeholders, we interview workers, and then we write a report for the banks that says they're doing pretty good, but they have some gaps in this and that. And to cover those gaps, they would have to hire 2 more people, increase the presence in the community, enhance their biodiversity action plan. And then the lenders would look at that and say, okay, we can live with this and we can impose these additional requirements to close the gaps. And based on that, we can do the financing. And of course, the final decision comes from all of these other aspects, right? Financial, marketing, but also environmental and social. Yeah. So then the loan document would say, we're going to give you $600 million to do this project. And on the environmental and social side, you have to do this and this and this and that prior to financial close, prior to first disbursement, prior to end of construction, whatever it is. And that becomes a contractual requirement. And then we, the consultants, can continue advising the lenders through the process, through the life of the financing, which can be 10, 15 years. If we work on the developer side, then what we do is we advise the developer on how they will have to navigate all this process. And sometimes we sit on the table across the same lenders we work for in other projects. But always the idea is that we come in with the mindset of we are not auditors, we are advisors. And really what we want to see is that the financing goes through, that the project is done, well done. So that's what we try to do.
I love the sound of everything that you do. So much fun.
It's never a dull moment, I can tell you that.
Yeah, but it's so helpful for people to get that outside perspective and see, here's what you need to do to get to this point and just have that roadmap laid out for them. We kind of touched on this before we started recording on the podcast, the term ESG. I don't think the work that you're doing is new, but ESG has become a hot topic lately. Is that evolving, changing? And since you've been doing this such a long time, how you're approaching your work?
Yes. And one of the things that is becoming a topic of conversation in the industry, among others, right? There are many, but among others, is that a lot of what I have described in this conversation so far is what we call E&S risk management, where mainly we're trying to reduce the risk of the transaction, the financing, the project itself.
Yep.
With ESG and the terminology and the approaches around ESG, that is coming more from the side of building value, becoming a good citizen of the overall community as a company, right? And now we're talking about how really these are two sides of the same coin, right? So one of the things that I'm working on now is merging those two angles and say, okay, both for a financial transaction or for a project or for the operation of a company, you minimize risk on one side and build value on the other. So on the minimization of risk, you're working more around compliance. Somebody's telling you what you need to do to be able to be there and reduce your risks. On the other side is more voluntary. You're doing good things because you are convinced that that's good. It's good business. And now it's all kind of permeating the mindset of the financial institutions, be it private equity or commercial banks or multilaterals, because they also now are thinking, we want to put money in enterprises that are good, because at the end of the day, that being good will have financial value, will increase the value of the company, the investment, ultimately the communities where we are located and all that. So it's evolving very fast. This other side of ESG, there is a proliferation of standards and opinions and ways to report. I think we still have a ways to go to get to a one set of accepted industry-wide standards. We're moving in that direction as an industry.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that. Reduce risk on one side and increase value on the other. That's just very to the point. I always see that ERM is hiring. I think I've seen you either post or like hiring posts for ERM on LinkedIn. What advice do you have for the people, especially young people who are just graduating and they want to get into ESG or they want to get into sustainability? I know that it's very challenging for someone to just be graduating and then come walking into a consulting role.
I would say that this is the moment.
Yeah.
The industry is going crazy. Okay. So if anybody has that interest, graduate and apply. Yeah. Because there are more positions in the industry than people applying for them. And there is also much competition. People are moving from one company to another. Now the companies like ours, we are emphasizing the value of supporting the growth of our professionals. We are emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are emphasizing working conditions that promote growth and involvement. So for a young professional right now, this is as hot an industry as any out there.
That's very encouraging.
Yeah, very much, very much.
Yeah.
And if you know of anybody, send them my way, please.
Definitely will.
We're looking for people.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, in your current role, you also travel quite a lot, which is something Laura and I both love to do. And we love asking this kind of question. Like, what do you see as the pros and cons for travel, or do you just love it all?
I love it all. And I miss it because, since COVID, we haven't traveled anymore. I think this is a good moment to bring one overarching topic in everything that we do, which is health and safety. And the commitment, both in our company and in the industry, to protect our workers, our clients, and our communities. Travel, as I mentioned before, sometimes we end up going to high-risk areas where there may be social conflictivity. We go to remote areas where access is hard. We sometimes go to construction sites where there are many, many things that could harm you, from simply tripping and falling to, going on a confined space. So travel is very exciting because of the cultural opportunities, because of the exposure, because of the opportunity to translate knowledge and capacity building across countries and organizations. But it's also a major commitment to keep your people safe. So we, in particular, ERM, safety is first in everything we do. Mm-hmm. And only after we have taken care of that and we are comfortable that we have managed, identified, and developed measures for securing our safety when we travel, then we travel and do all the stuff that we do. But safety always first.
Yeah. So how do you do due diligence in areas like, do you have to do that in areas you're familiar with, you're comfortable with? How do you do that in, like, if you're going to go to a different country, for example? How do you do that when you don't know? You may not know exactly what are the risks.
We have a network of people. We have offices in different countries. We also subscribe to a couple of safety consultancies that provide country profiles and things like that. So there are ways to gain an understanding of where you're going to be before you get there. And then we also engage our clients and our hosts in the region to work with us to make sure that the safety protocols are put in place. So again, we do the best we can to be well prepared before we get there. And then we have ways to, once we are there, if situations change, we have chains of command and flow of information where we can make decisions on the spot if we need to get out of an area or change the itinerary because of X or Y situation. And believe me, it happens. And it has happened to me personally, where we get to a country and then there are demonstrations on the street and we have to change our plans. But we have systems to do that effectively. And again, that it's an evolving field and we want to be always at the vanguard of it.
Yeah, that's really excellent to hear. And it makes a lot of sense. So do you have a story like that you want to share? I don't want to ask if you don't want to, but like a story of you having to adjust on the fly where you're like, oh, we had a plan and now it's changed.
Yes, I do have a story. I will not name names to protect the innocent.
Please don't. Yes.
But this was many years ago. And I have to say that what happened back then, the story that I would tell, did create conditions for the entire company to change safety protocols. And this was back in the 90s. And since then, the things we did in the 90s, my goodness, yeah, right. we will go anywhere and just do. Doesn't happen like that anymore. But, we were in the Amazonian jungle, flying in a helicopter, looking at these areas for a development project. The maps were not very accurate.
Oh.
And so, we're just flying around and two things happened in that same day. We landed in a small open patch of forest that had been cut down. The helicopter pilot was able to land between stumps of trees that have been cut. So that in itself was probably something that we wouldn't do today. We get out of there, we start walking around, and we had landed because I had seen that the understory of the forest didn't look right. It just didn't seem right. It seemed too flat, too uniform. Mm-hmm. So we land, we go in there, we start walking into the forest, and before I know it, we were in the middle of a coca plantation.
Oh.
And I wasn't quite sure about this, but I think there were some booby traps. So it's like, okay, we're out of here.
Yes.
So we get out of there, we keep flying around, and then at this margin of this one river, we see a camp, with buildings and stuff. And we thought it was the camp from our client company that had hired us to do the work. because we were looking for that.
Oh, no.
So we started approaching, and before it was too late, no, it was already too late, we realized it was an army encampment.
Oh.
Better the army than the other side, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But by the time we realized this, there were a few soldiers looking at us and kind of half pointing their rifles at us. And I told the pilot, just keep coming in and land very gently, and because we were not going to turn around and go.
No.
We were not going to do that. So we landed. The colonel that was in charge of the camp basically said, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" "Oh, well, we're biologists doing a study." And he was like, "Oh my God." And he said, "Well, the only people who come here unannounced are bad people. But we saw you flying around yesterday and now today, and nobody can be that stupid. So we knew that you were not the bad people." That was crazy. I ended up sitting, well, a couple of us ended up sitting with the colonel in his colonel's quarters, having a beer with him and chatting. And he was so happy to have visitors. But looking back, that was crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, the profession has evolved. And especially aspects around health and safety have evolved and become much more strict, and for good reason. I mean, things like that. At the time, I was like young and inexperienced, and it was all so exciting.
Yeah.
But looking back, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Good story.
You must have so many stories, and I know you have lots of good advice to share with people. I've heard you tell it at the career workshop. And I know that when we had that career workshop, you were very enthusiastic about joining and wanting to present there. So is that something that you do also? I mean, you make mentoring part of how you operate, and how do you feel about that, I guess?
Yeah, I think in the questionnaire I filled for the podcast, I mentioned that besides all the technical aspects and business aspects of what I do, I have a particular affinity and love for training, coaching, mentoring, helping junior professionals grow. And I just love that. I don't do as much of that as I used to do in some other moments in my career. But it's something that, as I move towards retirement in a few years, I would love to go back to that and really, give back as much as I can, the newer generation of professionals in the professional services industry.
That's great. Well, you're giving back just by being here. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. And before we end the interview, we'd love to ask some fun things about you too. And you mentioned that if you could do anything else other than what you do now, you might want to be a soccer pundit.
Yeah.
Hilarious. I love that. I love it. I would too. Genuinely love to be able to do something like that. So would you be calling Premier League games, and do you have a goal call, or is it just something about that?
Do I have a call? I don't think I'm going to do that. But I do.
I knew you did. Okay.
My wife would tell you that I can be quite loud when I'm watching the games. But yeah, I do follow the Spanish League, and I'm a Real Madrid fan. Okay. I follow the Premier League, and right now I'm just obsessed with the Champions League in Europe, and looking forward to the final on May 28th between Real Madrid and Liverpool. So that's going to be great. One of the things that happens, and I'm also a fan of boxing, and now with my son, he has made me a fan of UFC. Oh, and one of the things that happens all the time, and even since I was like 20 years old, is that we're watching something and we make a comment about the strategy, about what's going on, about, these guys should throw more uppercuts, or they should attack more from the left in a soccer game. Yeah. And literally, this has happened 1,000 times. Literally within 3 seconds, the commentator says, they should attack on the left side. It's like, pay me to do this. That's what I say. I want to be a pundit, and somebody can pay me to do that. That'd be great.
Start your YouTube channel, Ricardo.
I know, I may do that. And I can do it in Spanish and English.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll listen to it because I keep, for my whole life, keep trying to learn Spanish fluently. So That'll give me something else to listen to so I can learn.
Great. I'll let you know when I go.
Well, this has been so much fun. We're running out of time. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on that we didn't get to talk about today?
Perhaps there is one message that I give to my teams, to my junior professionals in my company and other presentations I give. And it's a simple concept about your career growth, which is your career is not your job, and your growth is not doing your job well. Not even that. Your growth will come from the increase in your multiplying effect. And that can be many different things. You can grow your multiplying effect in your company, in your job, by being really good at marketing. And that makes you bring a lot of money into the organization. Or you can be the best project manager, and then all clients want you to be in their projects. Or you can be the technical expert, and then you can mentor people, and that grows your multiplying effect. Or you can be good at a variety or a combination of those things, and then you end up becoming the CEO of the company. The multiplying effect, trying to make your contribution ripple beyond your immediate vicinity. That's what's going to grow your career. And that's the one message I want to leave for whoever is listening to this podcast.
That's awesome. I love it. Nick, hit the sound. You got the new sound machine. I like
know, right? Yeah,
add that in later. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate those words. I know Nick does because he's managing people and we talk about it all the time. So we really appreciate you being here. Last thing, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yes, as you mentioned before, Laura, I'm a partner at ERM, Environmental Resources Management. My email address is ricardo.calvo@erm.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just look for Ricardo Calvo and probably you'll find me there.
Yes, he's Ricardo Calvo, PhD. Remember that. And that's your email address until you retire. And then people pay attention because that's another open seat at ERM.
That's right. That's right. And, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been really fun. And, we can do another one on some other specific aspects of some of the things we talked about today.
That would be awesome.
I'd be game for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
That's our show. Thanks, Ricardo, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.